Mr. Stephen Bargo, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
No, thank you for having me. My first one.
Will you tell me about Bargo Capital? Is that your business?
Yes. So Bargo Capital, so over the years, we've had multiple different companies and names. This one was, I created Bargo Capital about 5 years ago, kind of reinventing ourselves and what we do. And I became a private equity, private capital, focusing in real estate, the oil and gas industry, investing in oil and gas drilling and buying, developing different types of real estate, and then doing a lot of distressed assets. Mm-hmm. And so I've built a company around managing, looking at to buy and sell and develop as a investment banking private equity firm.
Yes, sir. And being able to chat with you a little bit, you seem as like a brilliant person, I guess a gift to understand economics and money and how to, I guess, properly apply it. And I thought that was fascinating. Would you consider that a gift, or is this something hard learned, trial and error?
I think it's a blend. I think, through self-educating myself, starting off very, very young, investing and doing real estate, reading a lot, getting some mentors that I, kind of gravitated towards, even though jumping in with both feet and just doing it. So, started very early on investing and buying different types of real estate, immediately went into construction and started building and developing single-family homes, multifamily apartment complexes, and doing industrial parks and building warehousing in my early 20s. And that just kind of evolved, and learning and understanding financing through that, understanding how to make good investments, and moving into new and different markets. The more you expanded your vision and your ideas.
Okay. And I guess growing up, your mom and dad were missionaries in Mexico. Were you part of that? I mean, I'm sure you were with your parents. Were you able to witness some of that firsthand?
Yes. So I grew up, growing up from when they started, I was 5 years old when they first started building churches. So, part of being PK, preacher's kid, is that, you're in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, and any of the other, learning how to travel, and my dad speaking at different churches and going to that. So that was part of, your whole beginning life, that probably up to 18, where you were really involved in all of that they were doing and vision, and being a part of it because of them.
Okay. And was your dad, I guess, a pastor, preacher?
So he was a pastor early on, maybe the first 5 years. He was very good at planning churches and growing churches. Mm-hmm. So he knew that he was better off building a church, starting a church, and he would go and start them wherever he saw a need, whether that was a small little ranch village in Mexico or in a major city there. And he started a Bible school, and so a lot of those students that would come, they were from a certain part of Mexico, and they go, we need a church in the village I'm from, or the city, that town I'm from. And so he would kind of get behind them, figure out how to raise the money and come up, and they would at any given time have 5, 10, 15 churches being under construction, slowly out of cash flow, the money they either were given or raised to be able to do that. So that was always ongoing with the way they did that. And I got to be, front row seat at seeing how he did it, what he did.
That's amazing. So would you move to the different towns where he would plant them, or were you sort of central?
No, once he started doing that, we moved to Laredo, Texas, which was a border town, and he opened an office there. And that office grew into having a big support system. And he constantly had different ministries and churches would come go on mission trips. And somebody who said, the Lord called me to I believe the mission. I really like the work you're doing. Can we come be a part of it? And so he would constantly get support and help from all of those. And then he created a big pastoral church, more more non-denominational, growing that. And in Mexico, he applied for their own church licensing and everything. And so for the legal system, he would license the churches, and they would constantly grow those. Sometimes small churches would come and say, we need covering and like to be a part of your church because of the licensing and how hard it was in Mexico to do that. And so he just kind of grew that gradually. So he was constantly getting somebody coming to say, hey, we need a church in our area. And he was constantly starting more churches than maybe he would have wanted to, but he saw a need and he goes, well, let's figure it out, and we'll figure out how to get the money, or see if we can raise money to help build a church in the different towns across Mexico.
That is fascinating. So no one was teaching him the process. He would sort of get thrown in, we need a church, and then he would dive in and work through it. That sounds very similar to a gift that you have.
My dad, the first years when he was under denomination and was pastoring, they didn't pay him anything. He was getting $100, a week maybe, and so he constantly had to figure out how to get additional support, do odd jobs, do things. And so he gradually would figure out different businesses, and he had a knack for business, and he knew how to make money just doing some of the craziest different things that he was going, well, I need money for this, I'm going to go buy a piece of land. Or a friend of mine where I exchanged dollars for pesos, owned a Crest store, and he was a Christian guy that would give him a good exchange rate. And he was on the border, but he was from Missouri, and they kind of had similar backgrounds growing up on a farm. And that guy would say, hey, I want to help support a church, or, do you need money? And then he would go in there and he'd show up, and he'd have a pickup truck. In the back of his pickup truck, what do you have back there, Dave? He said, I bought 2,000 umbrellas from his friend that he said somebody was there and he couldn't sell them. He said, buy these, I'll sell them to you for 50 cents. He said, I'm going to drive them to Mexico and I can sell them for $2. I got a group that'll buy those. And people would give used clothes by the truckload, or food for my dad to give in Mexico. And then he would give those to the churches, the used clothes, and let them set up a little store to sell those clothes to help them support the church and pay the pastors. And he was constantly figuring out how to fund support. He would do a business deal and buy a piece of real estate to be able to build this church and that church. And so he was, and it seemed like he could always figure out how to fund whatever he needed to do, and how the Lord provided and gave him the resources, but also gave him the vision on how to do it.
Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. So are you able to keep up with any of those
Yes.
churches that are still?
Yes. So one of the pastors that I'm really close with, my dad found him on the street in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico at 13, and didn't have a really place. So my dad kind of adopted him, brought him under, took him to the Bible school that he had in that town, gave him a place to live. So he kind of grew up in there. At age, he started going to the Bible school. And my dad, and he was a little bitty short, makes about 5'2". My dad's, 6'2", great big, and he would take him everywhere, taught him, trained him. He would go on trips. My dad had a whole group of pastors, preachers that helped him in all of that. Well, he went on to graduate from the Bible school, went on to college, got a master's degree in psychology. My dad built a church for him in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, that's still going on, that probably has 300 to 500 people there. That church out of Pennsylvania helped support to help build that church. And so he has gone on. We've started new licensing for him for churches that I help him with and support. And now under his covering in Chiapas, Mexico, which is on the border of Guatemala, and that we have 45 churches under his church that he's kind of grown that into, and we support him and help him and do everything. And he's very resourceful because he learned from my dad, and so he's 58 years old now, and he has a wife. His wife met at the Bible school, and she got a college degree and became a teacher. He's got two daughters who have become teachers. They all work in his church and help, and we're in constant contact. I can pick up my phone. He sends me every morning at 6 o'clock a 5-minute prayer that he's praying for me and praying for our business. And then he has a prayer group of 50 to 70 people once a week that goes in the church that prays over our business and over us. And so, and that type of thing, we have multiple groups that we still stay behind and help and support. And they're all capable to run on their own because all of them have really figured out how to just trust the Lord for all their needs and are all become very, very resourceful.
And your father, I guess he would install when he would put together a church in an area, he would help find the leadership, I guess. Right. And that's so fascinating. That's so fascinating to think someone like that existed in the world, because it seems sort of thankless. And I know we don't do it for the praise at all, but it's very neat. Does he have a book, or is there anything?
No, funny is you say that. A lot of times people said you need to write a book, or you need to write one about your dad. And he had an incredible testimony himself. He grew up one of 13 kids in Kentucky with a dad who was 27, college educated tobacco farmer, who married his mother, who was 15 at the time, couldn't read or write. The dad ended up being very abusive. They grew up a hard life, made them all quit school to work on the farm. So my dad, they would run away from home between 14 and 17. The oldest brother, my dad was in the middle. His brother ran away to Cincinnati, Ohio. Ended up building a trucking company, became very successful. And as the rest of the kids would run away, he'd give them a job. So when my dad ran away from home to get away from his dad, he was living in an apartment. He couldn't do a big part of the job or drive a truck, and because he couldn't read or write. And so some guys in this apartment where he was living kept inviting him to church. He was 19 and kept inviting him to church, and he finally went one of those times because they wouldn't quit inviting him. And he didn't accept the Lord that night, but that weekend he was going to see his mother back at the farm. He went, and he says it was just on his head. And so he went out in the farm in between, he said, cabbage fields, and got on his knees and prayed and asked the Lord, if you're real, save me. And he said he felt the Lord's on his life so strong. He gave his heart to the Lord, and immediately God called him into the ministry. And so, but he couldn't read or write. So he had to go back to school and found a group that was like the GI Bill that you could go get free to teach him how to read and write so he could go to school. And so he learned to read and write. Then he went on to high school. He went on to seminary and to college. So he was 29 when he graduated from all of that. And he says, and God has a real big sense of humor. Then he calls me to Mexico where I have to learn to read and write in Spanish all over again. And so, and he met my mother there, who had moved there, and she had gotten saved. It came out of a family in Texas, and her dad had died when she was 9 months old, and her mother remarried, and she lived with her grandmother. And at 14, her grandmother passed away, so she's had gotten saved in a little Presbyterian church in a small town outside of Houston. Closer down to maybe even San Antonio. And the special speaker that came to speak when she got saved when she was 9 years old was from that seminary out of Cincinnati, So when it was time and didn't know what to do, she wrote them and said, I don't have the money to go to school, but I will work scholarship or where. And at 14, she went there to that school, and that's where she met my dad there. And so, and my mom's family came with the Spanish land grants to Texas, and they all were Spanish and spoke Spanish from there. And then part of her family then came from Mexico, so she spoke perfect Spanish. And so when my dad called him to the mission field in Mexico, it fit right in with her. But they were all incredible prayer warriors and incredible faith. So I had a really good mentor on faith, trusting God and growing. And then it seemed like anything he touched, he was never in it for money, but anything he needed to go out and make money for, to support whatever he needed, he could figure out how to do it, and quickly. And so I learned all that from him.
That's just amazing. And now you're involved in many deals now. You expressed to me you started in development, real estate development, very young. All your friends were in college, and you had begun on your own entrepreneurial journey to learn business yourself, I guess.
So, my dad ended up starting a car dealership in Laredo too. And so I learned from him how to buy and sell cars. I started a couple of businesses very early on. At 17, I started that my dad said, hey, there's a big need, and there's some contractors coming here. There's no porta potty companies. So I started a porta potty business at 18. And my dad went to the bank, and I got a loan for $70,000 and grew that and built that into a large company in business, because I moved those into San Antonio and Austin and Dallas, got government contracts, military contracts, and hired people all while I was running started construction companies, started building immediately apartments and warehouses just by accident. And so through all of that, and through my helping at my dad's car dealership and buying some, I learned how to finance and how to get financing and how to structure financing through doing that, and became friends through all the banks that he did business with, that he was friends with. And he became a shareholder of a small bank there that ended up growing into a very big, large bank. And I became friends early on, like 19, 20, with the bankers, and created lines of credit. And because my ability to do that, and grew that very, very, very quickly, like by 22, 23, I was already borrowing millions of dollars to build office buildings, apartments, and investing in real estate and everything. So I didn't know as much as I needed to know, but I knew that I just was going to do it and push forward and figure it out how to get stuff done. And you kind of step out in faith, and you learn as you go, not learn before you go. And so that's kind of what I did.
That is simply amazing. Your father couldn't read at 19 years old, and when you're 23 years old, you're going into these banks and getting resources.
So what's funny is my dad, he had this real down to earth, that Kentucky style, probably very similar to being here in Baton Rouge in Louisiana. He's kind of grew up a country boy, kind of salt to the earth, and he had that style down there on the border. So he would sell cars, and he would get applications to get those cars financed for the clients. So every morning he would get 6 dozen donuts, 2 dozen donuts for each bank. He'd walk in, and then he'd go, "Good morning, senoritas." He said, "I brought you, Mr. Bargo, you brought me my donuts." He said, "Yeah, and I have these applications that we need to see if we can't, run to see if we can't get loans for these guys from the cars that I sold yesterday." Then he'd turn around and go down and meet with the loan officers and say, "So, these guys, we need a loan for them. Their credit's not that good, but I think they're good people." He says, "I'd be able to," and they go, "Well, will you co-sign for this?" He said, "I'll co for that group there. I think they're good people." And he would negotiate with them. Then we'd go upstairs to the commercial banking, to where he had his car floor plan, where they financed his purchase of cars, and he would negotiate with the commercial lenders there and talk with them. And he took me to all those meetings, and I sat in all of those. So I knew early on. So I said, Dad, I started at 17. He'd let me buy 2 cars and put on the lot, and I'd sell my 2 cars on there. And I'd go in on the weekends and sell those and put those. And then, we had the porta potty business and that vacuum truck on the weekends. I would clean grease traps at restaurants, and they paid you with petty cash. So, I could go out and make $250 to $500 on the weekend, paying me $50 for vacuuming each one of those. So he had an incredible work ethic and strong that he instilled in us. And my dad, since his family life was so abusive, he made a promise to himself, I'm going to take good care of my kids. I'm never going to fight. I never saw my dad get mad. I never saw him angry, which was a decision he made because he grew up in an awful family that he did a 180. I never heard him cuss. My parents didn't drink. Their lives, you didn't feel like you were, judgmental or better than now, but that was just kind of the way they chose to live their life. So the example that I had from business to doing that, to living the right way, it was incredible. So I was very, very blessed that I had that example. And my mother had an incredible faith. Her mother married a Presbyterian priest, which she early on, they were pastoring a church in a small town south of Dallas, Texas. She went to a Catherine Coleman crusade in Dallas and got filled with the Holy Spirit. I showed up for the summer 14, and she said, you got to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit. This is what you need. And then she started following Oral Roberts and going to his crusades. And she grew up Catholic, then was in a Presbyterian church, and she was an incredible prayer warrior, and her hand on you in her life, which then my mother was as well, and how she became a prayer warrior and all that they did. And so again, I think I was very, very blessed to have such strong Christian and not overbearing. My dad had a presence wherever he walked in, but it was a very, very humble presence that he just loved people. And, we'd stay in a hotel or in a motel, we'd be traveling, and he'd be up early before everybody else. And when we walk out, he'd be grabbing the front desk guy by the head. He said, meet my new friend. He accepted Jesus this morning. And he says, we're best friends here. And say hello to the waitress over here. He said, she asked me to pray for her this morning. And, so wherever you went, it's kind of like he just had this ability. And it was not coming on not strong at all. It's just the way he did it. And the way he even handled life, problems, business, it was so determined, incredibly hard, but it seemed very understated in the style that he did it.
This is fascinating. So that is probably growing up in the business it sounds like in the gospel and in the missionary stuff. There's no school that you could send your kid to get that kind of a deal. Even going to the banks and seeing him interact with other adults. I guess all of that stuff just gets into you. I was part of my family's small business also, and I definitely would attribute I learned more there than I could learn in school.
Well, so I grew up and didn't figure it out till I was about 14. I had a severe dyslexic, and so I was a bad student in school and had a hard time reading and writing because they didn't even understand what dyslexia was during that time till my parents figured that out. And so come to find out, when I was finally tested, they tested my dad, and he was dyslexic, but he never knew he was. He just figured it was hard. Because he couldn't read or write when he was when he was 19. He just figured that's
It was just really hard.
And so, but my parents embraced and never pushed me and never worried about my grades. They still encouraged me, said you could do anything. So when I graduated from high school, I knew I wasn't going to college. I was like, I hated school and I was terrible at it. But I said, my dad said, well, what do you, I said, I want to do business. I'm going to start a company and I'm going to keep working with you. I'm going to start real estate. I'm going to start. And so quite a few of my best friends went off to college and I would go see them on the weekends. And while they were in school, two of them, one got an architecture degree at Texas A&M. The other one got a construction management degree. And when they came back home, as well as another one got an accounting degree, became a CPO. Including my brother-in-law, and I got married when I was 19. My brother-in-law graduated, and so they came in, and the construction guys said, and the architect wanted to start a company and build, but they couldn't find the money to do it. And I had saved about $200,000 by the time they graduated from school. So I backed them on 6 spec homes. And plus I had bought a foreclosed house when I was, during that time, redid it, lived there 2 years and sold it and made $40,000 doing that.
How old were you?
I was 21, 22. And this is in the 70s. And so I backed them, and I drove them crazy. I was so scared they were going to lose my money. I had already figured at the car dealership how to retrade and how to negotiate, how to buy cars, going to auctions, doing different things. So I was negotiating with the subs, and it was driving them crazy. And after a year, we said, and then I took all the risks. We split the money a third, a third, and a third. And I was like, they're like, that's isn't working, Steve. So I said, this is not that hard. I'm going to start a construction company. So, and I immediately, I don't know where I decided to think. So I immediately built 7 fourplexes, my first deal, and and I knew all the bankers in town. So I borrowed from 3 different banks, 2 each.
That's very bold. And how old were you at that time?
I was probably 24. And then I built an 18-unit apartment. And so I knew the bankers and talked them into doing it. Well, I did really good and made quite a bit of money doing those. And so my very next project was building 50 townhomes across the street from there. And I bought that land from that same guy that was one of my friend's dad, who was a wealthy Mexican who owned factories in Mexico. Well, he bought all this land. And so I bought it from him and started developing those pieces and learned how to negotiate with him.
Was that to sell those or to rent them?
They were to sell.
Okay.
And so, I ran the construction, didn't know anything about construction. I didn't use a broker. I sold them all myself. And I sold them to the bankers and to friends and to everybody.
What was your mom and dad saying at this point?
My dad just acted like it was normal. And, that project there, I made $500,000 or $600,000 profit on those 50 townhomes. And I was like, so I immediately went across the street and bought the land there, thinking I was going to build. I bought 24 acres, and I turned it into commercial and did it. And I ended up selling it off in pieces of land. And I brought the president of the bank in as a partner, a doctor who I'd met that was from Cairo, Egypt, who was a very wealthy doctor in town, and talked to him, and a Jewish guy that was one of the bigger retailers in town, and brought the 3 of them in. We bought that piece of land. I kept 40% of it. And over 9 months, I sold it off in parcels to build office buildings, to a bank, to a corner, and everything. And we made over $1 million on that. And so I made like $500,000 on that. And I go, man, this is incredible. This is better than working. I need to be buying and getting land and doing developments and figuring out how to reposition. And, the truth is I didn't know what I was doing, but I just knew, I figured out, I knew how to buy and sell, and I knew how to find people and what to do. And so that kind of just threw me into really running full speed, trying to put as many deals as I could. And we were on the border, and a lot of Mexicans were buying, those wealthy Mexicans wanting dollar denominated asset investments. And right in the middle of all of that, the peso devaluates to 50% devaluation. And I'm like, what does that mean? That means it costs them double, and that means there's no more Mexicans going to buy your stuff, which was I was doing. And at the time, I thought I had a lot of debt. It was $3 million on some other stuff that we were going to develop. And so I had grown that porta potty business, and I had grown one of them in Austin, Texas, with a military contract that my sister and brother-in-law, who were at University of Texas, I hired him to run it while I put it there. So that had cash flow. So I said, I'm going to move them. I had 4 kids, 9 years old to less than a year old to 9 years old. So I had been making, and I built our dream home. We had everything. Interest rates were at 20%. Jimmy Carter had come into office on top of that. So I moved to Austin, not knowing that I was going to go there and try and do real estate and put something together. And
the 80s, I guess.
Yes, or 81 to 83 in there. And I got to Austin and everything was for sale because interest rates were so high. Nobody was doing any business. And so I raised some money from some Mexican guys, bought development that had all these finished lots and nobody was buying them, and put $800 deposit on each one on the takedown for 100 and something lots. Tied up a piece of land to build an apartment subject to entitlements because it wasn't approved for that. And Austin's a hard place. And I moved the engineering firms from Laredo, the same guys that worked for me that went to it. Nobody had jobs and business came. So I talked them all into leaving, paying them almost nothing on the come with bonuses when we make money, and moved them all to Austin. And I'd already done so good too while I was there. You know, I had gone out and built my dream home. I had bought a plane. I had bought an Air Commander with the banker, us together. We had bought a golf course to develop around it. I mean, and we were, that's all the money that I owed on all that. So the
story, I'm sorry to cut. So you sound fearless in this story, but whenever you were going all in, it seems like many times you sort of went hard. You went very big. Was there a lot of fear coming in?
So the answer is no. The fear was, how am I going to pay this back? And I better figure something out to pay this back. It was the fear of doing new stuff and getting into new deals. It was more the fear is like, I've got this debt and I got to figure out how to do it. I've got 4 kids and everything. So I go in a pickup truck, go there in the market, and I buy all those things, put them under there and raise enough money to get them, start building some spec homes there, not knowing if I can sell. And the market turns. Reagan comes into office, and he's got a whole different philosophy, lowers interest rates, changes everything. And I was at the right place at the right time. And I tell everybody, timing is 70% of the deal. And a big portion, it's the people you're doing it with, more important most of the time than the deal. And so the timing was perfect when everything turned. Everybody was still scared. And I was there trying to buy anything and tie up everything I can because you could. And I made a ton of money because the market turned and I tied up enough stuff. On the land for the apartments, I was getting approval for 220 units. I put 10,000 earnest money down that I got from a Mexican guy that he gave to me in an envelope in cash for me to go put it on tying up this piece of land subject to entitlement. Took us 10 months to get it entitled and approved for apartments. The real estate commercial agent said, when I said, we didn't think you could get this approved. And he said, you want to sell it? I was paying $200,000 for it, which was nothing at the time. And I said, how much can you sell it for? So can get you $650,000 on this. I said, sell it. I had $10,000 earnest money up on it. I hadn't closed. So then bells and whistles go. I'd say, tell my guys, go tie up anything and everything subject to entitlements that we can control to go out and do that and do as many of these deals as we can.
And you would just lose the deposit if they didn't get.
Right. Well, and most of those was subject to entitlement. So I'd already figured if you can get the entitlement, there's a ton of buyers for that. And so, I bought subdivisions that way. In the next 3 years, I did a couple $100 million worth of deals. I hired all my best friends. I hired the law firm that I was doing this, 5 attorneys. Then you're making way too much money. Then I go out and buy a jet, and I, do all this stuff. And then the market crashes in 1987 because they changed the tax law. Oil went, and we're in the oil business. During that time, I was investing in oil and gas and leases and everything because all my guys I grew up with in South Texas came from all those ranches. And the banker that I ended up being friends with was in the oil, and he talked me into going and raising money for his oil deals. And so when the market crashed, then now I owe a lot of money, like maybe $100 and something million. And I don't know, now I don't know how I'm going to get out of that. And so then you spend the next 4 years working your way through that, trading, negotiating. And I had hired a bunch of top-notch key people, a bunch of MBAs. I was on one of those. My wife's dream trip was to go to Paris, and so she designed a trip. And I invited the pastor and his wife of the church we were going to in Austin on that trip. And so we went to Paris and spent like 3 weeks going from there to Nice to Monte Carlo that she designed. Flying back, a French guy was sitting on the plane. He's 29. I'm probably maybe the same age. And I said, what are you doing? He said, I came to see my family. I went to New York, get my MBA at Columbia. He worked for one of the big investment banking firms there. And I said, do you have all your securities license? He said, yes. I said, man, I need somebody to run our securities firm because we were doing what they call Reg D offerings, which was accredited investors, and doing memorandums and putting all those together. I'd grown into that. And so, long story short there, 2 weeks later, I flew back to New York. While we were on there, I had the pastor talking about business. He was talking to him about God. He was totally intrigued about getting saved. And so I flew to New York, hired him, and moved him 2 weeks later to Austin. And that kind of evolved in him raising money, introducing me to people in Europe that I didn't know. I'm at that time, I'm already raising money in Mexico from Mexican investors. And so when the market crashed, work through that, then I have to turn around and grow that. And so some guys out of Dallas sold me a deal that I met, who ended up being a pretty big deal in Dallas, and talked me to move to Dallas. And in Dallas, we started doing business and met, through a long story, met Roger Staubach because he owned his own brokerage company. And he was still playing, right after playing at the end of his career for the Cowboys. And he knew everybody, and the guys in his were all ex-jocks in his brokerage company. And they started showing us deals and bringing us deals, and we started raising money in Mexico to do those deals. And so we hit our second run where we really rebuilt everything that we had lost. But through that whole process, the key thing to learn from that is I learned how to work through problems, learned how to renegotiate debt, I learned how to fix problems, and in that I created a company that did turnarounds and workouts to be able to pay the bills through that process. And that whole education that I never wanted and never needed, and I didn't need that much, education and didn't want it, is that taught me what I needed to learn for the rest of my business career, that helped me make who we are today and knowing how to maneuver through that. And we used to, in Austin, we said, we kind of had fraternity, all of us had to give our offices back, and we all had these big high-rise fancy offices. We'd show up to the library across the University of Texas, and if you owed more than $50 million, you could join the fraternity where we'd all go and figure out what we were going to do next and cry over what we'd going through and how are we going to fix this. And we'd all sit and talk and figure out how we were going to work out our problems and pay back our debts and our bills. And the thing is that we all together and helping each other and talking through it is coming up with ideas on how to fix our problems.
So I guess you mentioned oil and gas and some friends. I guess once you start having a lot of cash flow, a lot of other business, a lot of those deals come to you. Is that?
So we get, yes. And so at this stage, we get 20, 50 deals a week that come across that we can look at, that people present, and that we've built a pretty good network there. A big portion of what we do is, knowing how to bring in some high net worth investors to be able to partner with us. Also knowing how to finance, how to structure, and how to put a deal together, and how to help. And through all of that, it looks like we're doing it ourselves. But I've gone through feast and famine. I've gone through everything I worked on and nothing worked. And I've gone through a season where it seems like everything worked and everything was. And through that whole process is you learn, because God's hands in our life is God's favor, and where was it? And what part was he playing in all this? And through that whole seasons of going through that, the biggest growth came out of getting on your knees and praying through those things and becoming the person and the man you're supposed to be. Because during those times when you made way too much money, my actions, my heart was always in the right place, but my actions weren't. You make too much money and you make some wrong choices personally along the way, and praying through those, and the Lord not realizing that all those blessings in your life is serving him and putting him first and having favor in your life was why the majority of our business, yes, he gave me a talent. Yes, he has, and was on me. But my blessings didn't come from everything I knew. I learned my trade well, but then you realize all my blessings came from putting him first. And sometimes those were the hard lessons that you weren't getting it, not listening the way you should. And I would say the Lord knew how to get my attention. Is he allowed me to go broke, because that's when he knew I would get on my knees. That was the one area that bothered me the most. I grew up in the church, so I knew how to have faith in all the other areas. And in the later years through all that, I've had 4 different cancers. I had colon cancer, where they took 12 inches, I call stage 4 cancer, bladder cancer, prostate cancer, had been through radiation, and skin cancer at different stages. And the Lord has healed me through doctors, but complete healing, that you realize, God, why am I still here? What is my plan? And through everything that went through and the people that I met along the way, I realized that the Lord had me in a marketplace ministry, and why he put me here when my dad was reaching the poorest people, and somehow I ended up with all these rich people, and what was the purpose for all that. And the Lord showed me that, hey, you're supposed to be a witness and make a difference in people's lives that are walking into a church, aren't doing that. Plus, all my growth came out of all of that. And that's been a lesson that I had to learn along the way, and a hard lesson some of those times. So the hardest times in my life has not been my financial ups and downs, is me hearing the Lord and doing his will the way he wants it. My dad had a big-time attorney, criminal attorney in Austin, that supported his ministry and loved to go over there. And he said, I was hard running, woman chasing, drinking, partying, making a ton of money. And God completely radically changed him. And he says at church, they let him keep going to that church because they wanted to prove there was a God. And look how much they saved him. But he used to wear a T-shirt that I used to love, and he wore it all the time. He says there's no misdemeanors in sin. They're all felonies. And I used to point, when I was around some of these, God, I do these. I'm not a bad guy. Look at those guys. Those are bad guys.
Yeah.
And so you justified the size of sin that you were living in, and realizing sin is sin, and you need to do it right. And the growth of understanding that and hearing God and knowing how to hear God. So at this stage of my life, it's making sure I'm constantly hearing God, and his will is part of my life and everything that I do. And Lord, don't let me get far enough away that I think I'm paying attention and I'm not.
I understand that. And you made a comment about when you had gotten to a really high financial place, that your heart was right, but your actions were not right. And this is just a question. Do you think? And I think so. God has all the money, right? He. Do you think if there's something in us that's not dealt with, and God opens up to take us to the next level, it wouldn't actually be a blessing to us. It would hurt us.
Yeah.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yes. And I think, so I've been blessed. I think more that's given, more is expected. God judges me harder than somebody else, because I've taken on that mantle. I believe and have the faith and expect a lot out of God and trust him for a lot. So he's going to trust me to live that way. And I don't have as much grace in my life as somebody else because I know better. I'm living this way. If you didn't know better, there's more grace over you till you learn better.
Yeah.
I know better. And so for me to do that and justify any of those actions is, I feel like I'm judged harder.
So you have keep up with any of your friends that you grew up with?
Yes, yeah. I keep up with most of them. Yeah. And some of them are partners still. One of the partners, one that was a CPA, he's 71 years old now. And, he has a huge client list of high net worth Mexican. Actually, he does their international tax law, and himself, and he's been very successful and invests and partners with me in that. And we laugh about, back when we were in high school or when he was in college, he said, offered him a job, he didn't come, and he took a job as a CPA in probably $9,000 a year. And he goes, and you were already making big money there, but I felt like that I needed to take this road. But we laugh now because he has seen my career and I've seen his career, and how we complement each other and can partner and laugh about, the things we've been through. As much as he is a CPA, he's in the oil and gas and is a wildcat in the oil and gas business, which doesn't really go with being a CPA and accountant in the conservative that he does, because he does that as well. And he's got a very large CPA accounting firm. But I've developed friendships that are long friendships that we all still work together and do business together. And that part has been good.
It says a lot. I have some questions about hearing from the Lord, and I think this is something maybe I really want to know. And so I obviously want, we want God's will and his direction. A lot of my friends will say, I have this big decision to make and I'm waiting to hear from the Lord about it. And I feel like I'm making 20 very important decisions a day. It's like I don't have time. I just have to kind of like, okay, Lord, I hope this is right. Close the doors that's not supposed to be open for me. Is that kind of
Yes, so,
resonate with you?
I prayed that prayer, Lord, close the doors that need to be closed, open the doors that need to be open. I've learned that a lot of the decision making, he's given me the answers to, because if you're serving him and putting him first, he's answered most all those prayers and given us the answers too. So one of the prayers I have to pray so I don't get ahead of God is, Lord, protect me from myself. Because sometimes I'm praying for decision. I might know the gut feeling or discernment or whatever you decision of that, and I'm not listening and I want a different decision. I move forward. And then I pray, and what happened here? Why did this is, you knew, and you've asked for insight, discernment, close the doors. I would, if I move forward in the bad decisions, and if I look back, I knew the right answers when I'd made those decisions.
See.
And so I believe that a lot of times all our prayers have been answered because he's given us all the answers to everything. He says, when he said, you will have the same, you can do the same thing I've done and have the same powers and strengths that I have. You just need to have the faith to exercise them because those prayers have already been answered. And he gave us our personalities. If you're serving him and putting him first and you're in God's will spiritually, I think those answers are there. And I see that. I walk in a church and I see the needs in a church, and you see people who are struggling financially, or they're struggling, for sickness, or you're struggling for all that and don't understand the reasons why or God's purpose. I told you my sister loved the Lord, on fire, witnessing for God. She was killed in a car accident, 29 years old, with 5-month-old and a 6-year-old. Why? Am I supposed to start questioning that or questioning God? Don't know those answers. All I know is I got to keep my life focused on him. He gave me this personality and the drive that I have and the ability to think through that I've done, is that if I'm serving him, 95% of the time, I know the answers and how to move forward on those. So I don't need, yes, you need to pray, but the prayer is not for the answer, just to make sure you're still in tune with God and his will in your life. Yes. Not on those decisions that you're making, because he gave us our personality. He knows, and we're serving him properly. And I do believe, look, I push the envelope every day, and that's part of my DNA. And I'm driven, and I'm hardworking, and I want to make a difference, and I want to make a change and impact. Is that he gave me that personality. When I was down and broke that time, I was like, I'm looking, and God, why did you give me this personality? Why did you let me do this? Why couldn't I have been a teacher and been happy with a salary and a job and a retirement? Why did you give this to me? If you sit back and listen, he said, I gave it to you because I intend you to use it for me. Icing on the cake is you get to have some of the fringe benefits there. Take that drive, that desire, and use it for me and make a difference. And you get to benefit from that. And so once you start understanding what he's already answered, what he's already done, those hard decisions that you make. Now, obviously, you're equipped. You know what you know in the industry. You're not going to go out and pray for some miracle and something that you don't know anything about. Right. And, I want to be, go operate on somebody, and I'm not a doctor. You've got to have the education. But now that you have the education, he's equipped you to be able to do all of those surgeries, and you're serving him and you're praying over the people that you're working and doing surgery on. He's answering all of those. He's equipped you. You've equipped yourself. Yeah. I feel like in business, in your hard decisions that you're making, you say 20 a day, which I'm doing the same thing. He's equipped me. And how do we together pray and just make sure that I'm in aligned with him, so that what I am doing is aligned with him. I know he's going to bless me because he wants me blessed in everything that I do.
Yeah, it sounds like wisdom. It sounds like abundance of wisdom, and that's what I'm gathering from you and your father and your whole story. It sounds like wisdom, and there's knowledge. It's how to do something, and then wisdom is when you put it to the test. How do you paint the wall? Well, you put a brush on the thing, but when you go to paint the wall, there's a lot more involved. It does, you actually grow from the reality, and you actually know it true. And I know that believers, people who've been born again, that we are living in the most accurate version of reality. So as you and I experience life, we are able to experience it in the most accurate in the most accurate way, right? And I get a lot of feedback because I do a lot of product development. I come up with a lot of stuff, and it's important to me that people understand that God truly deserves all of the credit in it, because when I'm brought into like a complex problem that I need to resolve, God has brought me through micro versions of that throughout my career and throughout my life in various instances, and allowed me to move through and develop a true understanding of the way things work. And another thing, you say inventing, I mean, God is the architect of this reality. It's all, I feel more like a discoverer. I feel like I'm discovering. I feel like he's opening, he's letting me find the thing he already knew and had. So it's a beautiful life. And I'm harping on this a little because there's business people out there. Maybe there's younger people that might come across this and watch this. And it's important that, your story is obvious. It's obvious. For myself, it's important that people know it's not this, great thing that's in Craig. God truly deserves all of the glory. And the gift that he's built into me from when I was born, I'm very technically inclined. Like I said, do some complex troubleshooting, innovate, whatever. That stuff would have not been properly used if I would not have walked with him. If I would have never met him and I would have just pursued money or pursued self, whatever, none of that could be properly developed into his purposes and for my life. And I think your life is a testimony of something like that.
But, just in the short time us meeting and seeing you, you can see the talent and the blessing that God's blessed you with, far as your intellect, your thought process, that gives you the talent to do the things that you like doing, but that you're good at doing, and knowing that there's comfort in knowing that he gave you all of that, and knowing how to pray and just make sure you use that, one, to bless you, but two, how is he wanting you to use that for the glory of God. But I sit back and am amazed at people that I come across, and I meet new people every week that you see that God has blessed them and talent, and sometimes they don't see it. They're looking for more answers and more road, or praying to give you this and that, when he's given you all the tools. And it's nice to see somebody like you that appreciates those tools, and you're using them. And obviously we tweak those as life goes on, and how we grow from that and use it. And that whole process is him trusting us on how are we going to use it properly, so we don't get carried away, like maybe on my part, and misusing or doing something I shouldn't do, or making way too much money, more that it seems like I'm supposed to be doing this with it and appreciating it in a completely different way. Not that he's not wanting you to completely bless yourself, but it's the mindset and how you think and how you put him first. And when you first learn a lot of the scriptures, and the Lord will give you the desires of your heart, and and I'm focusing on all this money that he's going to give me the desires. And the closer I get to him, the more you realize he changes those desires, and those desires are not as important anymore, and they keep going away because now your focus is in the right place. And usually my checkpoint is, what am I saying these desires are for? And if it's way too lopsided to where it's all about money, or it's all about success, or it's all about that, hey, you're headed down the wrong track. You've got to get that better in check. And he wants to bless you, but your heart will align with what his desires are for your life, not what my desires are for my life.
And that's wonderful. I love every. I'm gonna make a clip of that part and replay that over and over. You switch gears a little. You talked about being spirit filled. I guess we're not switching any gears. This is kind of where we're at. I think this is relevant. Being spirit filled. Your mom, Oral Roberts. You said you went.
My grandmother.
Your grandmother. Okay. Oral Roberts. And then, would you mind telling me about that experience?
So my grandmother went to this Catherine Coleman crusade in Dallas, Texas. She's a Presbyterian pastor's wife, not spirit filled. And she goes to that, and the Holy Spirit comes over, and she received the baptism of the Holy Spirit and changes. And she was already, loved the Lord, prayer warrior, but it radically changed her life. And she couldn't give enough to her kids, her family, and her grandkids. So when I show up at 14 to spend some time with her in the summer at her house, he goes, you have to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit. I need to pray over you. I need to pray that you receive it. And she was explaining and adamant about it. And her life was a simple life. She didn't live a luxurious life, but her life was all about her family, praying, making a difference, and being the prayer warrior she was for you and what you did, and changing your life and be an important part of what you're going to do with your life and how God's going to touch you. And, for somebody like that, which she was set in a different box than what I feel like God's given me. It's like, I want to conquer the world, travel the world, be able to see what I can do. But at the same time, you never know a small church in Oklahoma where Oral Roberts got saved, or a small church in Carolinas where Billy Graham got saved, that it didn't look, their impact was not as big in what was happening. And the one person that got saved in their church went on to make a massive difference in the world. So where I don't let my grandmother down and her prayer over my life, my mom's prayer over my life, what impact am I supposed to make? Not that I'm so self-centered to think, I could be like one of those guys. But I do know one thing. I do know the life that he did give me. How do I make a difference? And their prayer over me, and nonstop prayer over me, didn't go in vain.
Yeah. Can I share my experience, how I was filled with the Spirit? Okay. So I mentioned before, I was 23 whenever I was born again, visited a church. I got to a place where I wanted to be good, but I saw myself as bad. And I went to a church a few times, and I just said, God, those are the good people, and I'm the bad people, and I don't. Anyways, he took me to a church. I heard the pure gospel that everybody's a sinner, and that everyone has to be born again. You have to be saved. You have to accept Jesus as your Savior. And I was working in an auto repair shop. That's what I did for my job my whole life. Like I said, I was mechanically inclined since I was a baby, working in there, and I felt God calling me to go to Bible college because I'd just gotten saved. I didn't know the Bible. I didn't grow up in church. I'm like, I need to know what's in there. But I'm like, this isn't a ridiculous thing. That's an absurd thing to go, to go to a Bible college and quit your normal job. And I started auditing the classes, but not like attending full time. So I went in one of the classes, and they do a little. and I didn't go to the Bible college, so I was just there in like a ball cap. I didn't fit in at all there. But before each class, they did a little prayer. One of the students would go up and pray, and they would say, "What do you take requests?" And each person would go and say, "Oh, I want house or whatever." And then mine was, "I want to be filled with the Spirit." I had sort of had a weird. I'd gotten saved quickly, but this took like 2 years before 23 saved, but like 24, almost 25 before I was filled with the Spirit. And I had gone up to a few altar calls, and it was hard for me to accept that speaking in tongues and being filled with the Spirit like that, because I'd seen something maybe on 60 Minutes where people were handling snakes and that's what they did. And I was like, it just seemed weird to me, like all the way weird, right? And then, so the student prayed at the front of the class. Okay, yeah, fill him with the Spirit, whatever. And then afterwards, the man got up. His name's Lauren Larson. He's a Bible. He was the president of that college at the time. And he said, "Well, this is why we're here. If you want to be filled, you can have this right now." And he said, "I have my Bible," and he said, "Go here." And he showed me a few places in the Bible that talks about it. And then I came, stood up. He called me to the front of the thing, and I'm telling you the truth, because I hope it has more validity, because I expressed how I was I was unbelieving about it. I mean, I had the least amount of belief about it, that was the hardest thing for me to accept. And as soon as he laid his hands on my head, I'm telling you, it started flowing out of me, and I started just weeping. And then I felt no one pushed me to the ground, but I just sort of went all the way down to the ground, and I was saying everything that I'd ever wanted to say to God in the most purest way. It was like I was speaking, and as it was flowing over me, I realized that I'm like disrupting the class or whatever, and everyone in the whole class at that point was just weeping and on the floor, and then all the other classes started sort of filtering in there, and we had like a 2-hour revival where everyone was just it was just really powerful for me. And it was like God showed me, it was just such a true moment. And after that, I felt like a boldness. I felt like he empowered me with sort of a boldness. But anyway, so I go back to the car shop to work, and then I'm like, "Lord, guide me. It's like I knew the decision was for me to go to the college and to learn the Bible. And then one day I was taking apart a car when they get in a wreck. Like, you take the bumper off and the headlight, you take it sort of down to the bare structure and let the insurance company come and evaluate further damage, right? So I'm taking this thing apart, take the headlight out. I'll pull the headlight out, and written in the metal behind the headlight, it said, "Did you ask the Lord to guide you?" And it was like 40 times I did. It was almost like the obvious, and that's actually right there. I actually cut the metal out and framed it right.
Oh wow,
right
that's
there.
cool.
Yeah. So that was like it was like in my little world of it was like in my little world of fixing cars. It's like he came in there and showed me the truth. And I was able to. And I told my dad, I said, "Hey, this is gonna sound crazy to you, but I'm gonna quit working, and I'm going to go and learn the Bible." He's like, "You trying to be a preacher or something?" I'm like, "No, I definitely don't want to do that, but I just need to go learn the Bible." So anyway, that was my story about being filled.
That's cool. There's so much in our lives that I could tell you, and the ups and downs that you go through, and the things that I did wrong that I could go back. I wish I could go back and change, or the things, but knowing that the grace is there and his hand never left you, and that he forgave you, and that he still loves you and still wants to bless you, knowing that you can walk with that grace and feel that blessing. And where I'm at today, which I will be 73 this month, is where I'm at today, is I walk in that grace and can feel his presence in everything I do every day and every opportunity that I live in. And him knowing my heart and my desire and letting all of that happen, and to be able to make a difference, that every day I enjoy life. I meet new people. I'm doing the business that I want to do. I have as much success as I want, and that his hand is on that. And the people that work for me, now are work with me or that are partners with me. I said the first part of my life, I chose everybody. I read resumes and I picked the best that I could pick. I said, I can honestly say today that every one of you God chose and I didn't choose you and he brought you to me. And I know that you're where you're supposed to be and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And him choosing you, your resumes are all way better business-wise, spiritually, in every area of life. And me walking through this season of my life and the amount of blessings that I have on my life, the amount of people that are around me, knowing that he's in the middle of it all, it's easy to walk through every day.
Wow. That's good. It's beautiful. Mr. Stephen, this has been is there anything else you'd like to talk about? This has been true. And this is hard for me to believe this is your first podcast. You know, be led how you feel, but you need to be more. We need to hear more from you, however that looks like. And I'll come to if you have a spare room or office, I'll set you up a nice podcast, whatever, just where you can I'll make it automatic. You just push the button and just talk. We definitely, everyone needs to hear what you have to say, first of all, but especially business people, especially Christian entrepreneurs. You've been through all of that. I mean, at the highest levels, I mean, obviously, but again, that is so much wisdom that you have to offer us, and I appreciate your time in this.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And I wasn't sure how it was going to go today or what I was going to say. And we said so little of the big picture, but yet praying to make sure what we did say makes a difference.
Yes, sir. And obviously, you're always welcome back. And I'll probably come fly and visit you sometime. I don't know, see what you got going there. But
no, I appreciate that. Thank you. And it's been a real joy to meet you and spend time with you.
Yes, sir. Thanks.